Kyle Richards' daughters reportedly called their own father a HOE, and Kyle admitted she may have actually enjoyed telling Mauricio about it. That sounds like a shocking family moment. But behind the joke is a much bigger story about Kyle Richards, Mauricio Umansky, their separation, and the uncomfortable way their daughters have watched their parents' relationship completely change. For nearly 3 decades, Kyle and Mauricio were presented as one of the strongest couples in the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills universe. They married in 1996, built a family together, raised 4 daughters, and created a life that looked almost untouchable from the outside. Then everything changed. Their separation became public in 2023, after 27 years of marriage. And suddenly, the family that fans had watched for years was dealing with something completely different: separate homes, new relationships, dating rumors, public speculation, and daughters trying to understand what was happening to their parents. And now comes the moment that has people talking. Kyle revealed that some of her daughters have jokingly criticized Mauricio's behavior during his single life, and apparently one of them actually used the word "hoe." Kyle even joked that she may or may not have enjoyed being the one to warn Mauricio about it. But was this simply a funny family exchange? Or does that comment reveal something deeper about how Kyle's daughters really feel about their father's post-separation behavior? Because these aren't outsiders commenting from the sidelines. These are his daughters. They watched their parents' marriage change. They experienced the emotional fallout. They heard the rumors. They saw their father step into a new chapter. And they watched their mother navigate life after a marriage that lasted almost 3 decades. So when a daughter jokingly calls her dad a hoe, there may be more behind the joke than people realize. What exactly did Kyle tell Mauricio? Why did her daughters react this way? And what does this reveal about the dark, complicated side of the Umansky family's new reality? Let's break down what was actually said, and separate the family joke from the much bigger story surrounding Kyle and Mauricio's separation. For years, Mauricio Umansky was presented as the calm, successful husband standing beside Kyle Richards. He was the businessman, the father, the man who seemed to have built a picture-perfect Beverly Hills family with Kyle. But after their separation, that image started changing. And the people watching that change most closely weren't necessarily the fans. They were his own daughters. Kyle and Mauricio share 3 daughters together: Alexia, Sophia, and Portia. Kyle also has her oldest daughter, Farah, from her previous marriage. And as the family adjusted to their parents no longer being together, their daughters began seeing their father in a completely different context. Before the separation, they had spent most of their lives seeing their parents as a couple. Then suddenly, they were seeing headlines and paparazzi photographs showing their dad dating, kissing other women, and living the life of a newly single man. That wasn't necessarily easy for them. Kyle herself explained that the daughters were sometimes even more upset than she was when photographs of Mauricio kissing another woman appeared online. She said it was strange for them, because they had grown up seeing their mother and father together. And then came the moment that turned all of that discomfort into one brutally honest joke. During the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills Season 15 premiere, Portia talked openly about seeing photographs of her father with other women. Instead of pretending everything was fine, she explained that she would tell her friends, "My dad's being a hoe." That one sentence immediately changed the tone. Because Portia wasn't describing Mauricio as some distant celebrity. She was talking about her dad. And Kyle's reaction made the moment even more revealing. Rather than shutting Portia down, Kyle and the daughters laughed about it. Kyle later admitted that she had to give Mauricio a warning that the comment had been said on camera. And here's the part that makes the story especially interesting. Kyle said she may or may not have enjoyed having to tell him. That doesn't necessarily mean Kyle was celebrating her ex-husband's embarrassment. But it does show that there was a certain amount of humor in the situation. After years of marriage, Carl was no longer in the position of defending Mauricio as her husband. She was now his estranged wife. And their daughters were old enough to have opinions of their own. That's a massive change. Because when a marriage ends, the children don't simply watch their parents become single. They have to redefine both parents individually. For Portia, that meant seeing a father who had spent decades as part of a married couple suddenly appearing in dating headlines. For Sophia and Alexia, it meant navigating their own reactions while also maintaining relationships with both parents. And Carl admitted that the family had gone through a genuinely difficult adjustment. In a Bravo interview, she said her daughters had struggled after the separation and described the transition as emotionally difficult, while also saying they had gradually become stronger and closer as a family. So the HOE comment wasn't happening in isolation. It came after years of family history. It came after a 27-year marriage. And it came after the daughters had watched their parents' relationship change in front of the world. That's why the joke landed differently. It wasn't simply, "Dad is dating." It was, "Dad is dating, and now the entire world can see it." And apparently, the daughters weren't afraid to tell him exactly what they thought. Mauricio himself has acknowledged that his daughters give him dating advice. He has said they want him to be happy and enjoy being single, but they also encourage him to be age-appropriate and careful about being photographed with someone when a relationship is still new. So underneath the jokes is actually something pretty revealing. His daughters aren't necessarily trying to stop him from dating. They appear to be trying to make him understand that his choices don't exist in a vacuum anymore. Every photograph can become a headline. Every kiss can become a storyline. And every new woman can become something his daughters have to explain to their friends. That's the strange reality of having famous parents. Their private family changes become public entertainment. And Mauricio's daughters are learning how to deal with that reality in real time. But there's another layer. Carl and Mauricio may no longer be together, yet they still have to remain a family. They still share children. They still attend important milestones. And despite their separation, they've continued showing up for their daughters. In fact, as recently as August 2026, Carl and Mauricio reunited to help their youngest daughter Portia move into college, demonstrating that whatever happened between them romantically, they continue to co-parent and support their children. That makes the HOE comment even more interesting. Because behind the laughter is a family trying to figure out how to exist after the marriage that defined so much of their lives has changed. Carl is learning how to live independently. Mauricio is learning how to date independently. And their daughters are learning how to accept that their parents are no longer the couple they grew up with. But if Portia's joke tells us anything, it's that the daughters aren't simply sitting quietly and accepting everything. They are watching. They are commenting. And apparently, they are checking their dad when they think he's going too far. And that's where the real story begins. For almost 3 decades, Carl Richard's daughters knew their father as part of a married couple. Mauricio wasn't simply dad. He was Carl's husband, their father, and one half of the family unit they had grown up with. Then, in 2023, that structure changed. Carl and Mauricio separated after 27 years of marriage, and although the former couple remained amicable and committed to their family, the reality of their separation meant their daughters suddenly had to see both parents as individuals rather than as one married team. And that transition wasn't necessarily easy. Portia, in particular, openly acknowledged that she was still processing her parents' split. When photographs began appearing of Mauricio kissing other women, she reportedly reacted by calling her dad a hoe. Now, on the surface, that sounds hilarious. A teenage daughter roasting her famous father. Classic family behavior. But there's another side to it. Imagine growing up for years believing your parents are simply mom and dad. Then suddenly, Your father is appearing in entertainment headlines with women you've never seen before. Your friends can see those photographs. Your classmates can see them. Millions of strangers can comment on them. And you're expected to process all of that while still having a normal relationship with your father. That's not exactly easy. And Kyle's daughters weren't necessarily angry that Mauricio was dating. The situation appears to have been more complicated than that. They were watching their father's new single life unfold publicly. Mauricio had spent decades being known primarily as Kyle's husband. Now he was being photographed as a single man. And that completely changed how the daughters saw him. Kyle has previously explained that her daughters were sometimes upset by seeing photographs of Mauricio with other women. The family had spent years together, so watching their father suddenly appear in romantic situations could feel strange and emotional. That's where the HOE joke becomes more revealing. It wasn't necessarily a declaration of hatred. It was a way for the daughters to process something uncomfortable through humor. Instead of having a heavy family meeting every time Mauricio appeared in a new photograph, they could laugh about it. They could tease him. They could tell their father, "Dad, what are you doing?" And Mauricio apparently understood the joke. In fact, reports have indicated that his daughters have given him dating advice since the separation. They want him to enjoy his life, but they also don't want him making choices that create unnecessary headlines or embarrassment for the family. That is a fascinating dynamic. Because Mauricio is technically free to date. Kyle is technically free to date. They are separated adults. But their daughters don't suddenly stop being their children just because the marriage ended. They still have feelings. They still have opinions. And they still have to watch both parents move into completely new chapters. Kyle has also experienced her own complicated dating life since separating from Mauricio, including intense public speculation surrounding her relationship with country singer Morgan Wade. So the daughters weren't simply watching their father move on. They were watching both parents redefine their personal lives at the same time. That can create an incredibly confusing family dynamic. One parent is dating. The other is dealing with dating rumors. The family is still appearing together. And yet the marriage itself is no longer what it once was. That's why the situation can't simply be reduced to Kyle's daughters called Mauricio a hoe. The joke is entertaining. But underneath it is a family adjusting to an enormous change. And perhaps one of the clearest examples of that adjustment happened very recently. In August 2026, Kyle and Mauricio reunited to help Portia move into college. The former couple traveled together with family, helped her settle into her dorm, and shared an emotional milestone despite no longer being married. That moment says something important. Whatever happened between Kyle and Mauricio romantically, they are still parents. They can separate. They can date other people. They can disagree. But when one of their daughters reaches a major milestone, they can still show up together. And that makes the family dynamic much more complicated than the headlines suggest. Because while fans may focus on who Kyle is dating or who Mauricio is kissing, the daughters are dealing with something much more personal. Their parents are no longer together. And they have to figure out how to love both of them without feeling like they have to choose sides. That's probably why humor has become so useful. If Portia calls Mauricio a hoe, everyone can laugh. But underneath the joke is a daughter saying, "Dad, we see what's happening." And Mauricio has to live with the fact that his children are now old enough to judge his dating decisions. The same man who once gave his daughters advice is now receiving advice from them. And that role reversal may be one of the strangest consequences of the separation. But there is an even bigger question. If Kyle and Mauricio are genuinely committed to keeping their family united, how do they handle future relationships? What happens when one of them becomes seriously involved with someone new? Will the daughters embrace that person? Will they feel protective of their mother? Will they continue teasing Mauricio? And most importantly, can Kyle and Mauricio truly build separate romantic lives while keeping their daughters completely out of the emotional crossfire? Because that's where this story could become much more complicated. The HOE comment might have sounded like nothing more than a funny family joke, but when you look at everything surrounding Kyle Richards and Mauricio Umansky, it becomes clear that their daughters have been forced to grow up inside a very complicated family transition. For almost 3 decades, Mauricio was part of the identity of the Richards family. Kyle and Mauricio married in 1996 and eventually raised 3 daughters together: Alexia, Sophia, and Portia, while Kyle's oldest daughter Farah was also part of the family. So when their marriage changed, the daughters didn't simply lose the image of their parents being together. They had to adjust to an entirely new version of their family. And Mauricio's dating life became one of the most visible parts of that adjustment. Portia's "my dad's being a hoe" comment came from exactly that uncomfortable place. She was reportedly still struggling with her parents' separation, while also seeing her father appear publicly with other women. And Kyle's reaction was telling. Instead of treating the comment as some devastating family crisis, she reportedly found the situation funny enough to admit that she may or may not have enjoyed telling Mauricio what his daughter had said. That is where the dynamic becomes fascinating. Kyle wasn't simply defending Mauricio anymore. She was no longer playing the role of wife. She could laugh at the situation as his former partner while still being the mother of his children. And Mauricio had to deal with something he probably never expected. His own daughters were now commenting on his dating behavior. That's a complete reversal of roles. For years, parents give children advice. Now Mauricio was receiving advice from his daughters. And apparently, they weren't always being gentle about it. But there is something else worth noticing. The daughters haven't simply turned against their father. The available reporting actually suggests something much more complicated. They want Mauricio to be happy. They understand that he is single. They know he has the right to date. But they also see the consequences of his choices because his dating life happens in public. Every photograph can become a headline. Every woman can become a rumor. Every new relationship can become a topic of conversation among friends and family. And when you're the child of 2 reality TV personalities, that attention can feel impossible to escape. This is why the daughters' reactions matter. They aren't random internet commenters. They are part of the family. They knew Mauricio before the separation. They knew Kyle before the separation. They remember what their household looked like when their parents were together. And now they are watching both parents create completely different lives. That doesn't necessarily mean they want their parents back together. It means the transition has emotional consequences. And Kyle has acknowledged that her daughters were affected by the separation. The family has continued to prioritize staying connected despite the breakup, and that became particularly obvious this month when Kyle and Mauricio reunited to take Portia to college. That moment is important because it shows the other side of the story. The headlines might focus on Kyle's daughters calling their father a hoe. But behind those jokes is a family that still shows up for each other. Kyle and Mauricio may no longer be married. They may have separate romantic lives. But when Portia reached a major milestone, both parents were there. They traveled together. They helped her move into her dorm. And they said goodbye as a family. That's not exactly the picture of a family completely falling apart. It's something more complicated. It's a family rebuilding itself around a relationship that no longer exists in its original form. And Mauricio has another major role in that process. He has to figure out how to be a single father while still respecting the feelings of daughters who remember him as half of a married couple. Kyle has to do the same. And neither parent can completely control how their daughters react. That may be the real lesson behind Portia's joke. The kids are watching. They notice the photographs. They hear the conversations. They see the headlines. And sometimes, instead of quietly accepting everything, they make a joke about it. But the family dynamic doesn't end there. Because while Mauricio is dealing with his daughter's reactions, Kyle is also navigating her own complicated new chapter. She's no longer simply Mauricio's wife. She's building an identity independent of the marriage. And the same daughters who tease their father are also watching their mother figure out what comes next. That's why the situation is much more emotional than the word "ho" suggests. The joke is funny. The family dynamic is serious. And the biggest question isn't whether Mauricio can survive being roasted by his daughters. Of course he can. The bigger question is whether Kyle, Mauricio, and their daughters can continue building a healthy family relationship while their romantic lives move in completely different directions. Because the marriage may have changed. But the family hasn't disappeared. And that's where the real story gets even more complicated. What makes the "ho" comment so interesting is that it didn't come from a random fan or a reality TV rival. It came from inside Mauricio Umansky's own family. And according to Kyle's comments, the daughters have been candid about their father's post-separation behavior. Portia's joke became public because she was talking about how strange it felt to see her father photographed with other women. The comment was clearly delivered with humor, but it also reflected the reality of a daughter watching her parents move into completely separate lives. And Mauricio has apparently learned that his daughters aren't afraid to give him feedback. In fact, during another awkward family situation involving paparazzi photos, Mauricio said his daughter Sophia reacted when photos of him with reality personality CJ Franco appeared. He explained to his family that the interaction had been misunderstood and that Franco was only a friend. Think about that for a second. Mauricio is a grown man. He's single. He's allowed to date. He's allowed to have female friends. But when a photograph appears online, he doesn't just have to deal with the media anymore. He has to explain himself to his daughters. That's a completely different kind of pressure. Because his daughters don't see Mauricio the way fans do. They don't see the real estate mogul. They don't see the television personality. They don't see the man being photographed at restaurants. They see their dad. And when their dad suddenly becomes the subject of dating headlines, it can create an awkward situation at home. That's why the "ho" joke actually tells us something about the family dynamic. The daughters appear comfortable enough with Mauricio to tease him directly. They aren't treating him like some untouchable celebrity. They are treating him like the father who can be embarrassed at the dinner table. And Kyle seems to understand exactly how funny and awkward that can be. But there's another side that shouldn't be ignored. The family has still managed to maintain a strong connection despite Kyle and Mauricio's separation. Just days ago, Kyle and Mauricio reunited to take Portia to the University of Colorado Boulder for her freshman year. They traveled together, helped her move into her dorm, and spent time together as a family before saying goodbye. That moment is important because it proves something the sensational headlines often miss. The marriage may be over, or at least separated, but the family is still functioning as a family. Kyle and Mauricio can be criticized by each other. Their daughters can joke about their dating lives. The media can speculate about their relationships. But when their daughter reaches an important milestone, they can still stand beside each other. That's a very different picture from a family completely destroyed by a breakup. And perhaps this is why Kyle's daughters feel comfortable enough to joke about Mauricio. There is still a foundation of love underneath the teasing. The family has gone through an enormous transition, but they haven't completely separated from one another emotionally. In fact, Kyle has continued to speak proudly about her daughters and the family they have built. And the latest developments show that their family circle is actually expanding. Kyle's eldest daughter, Farrah, recently announced that she is expecting her first child with Zach Goldsmith. The news means Kyle is preparing to become a grandmother, while Mauricio will also enter a new stage of family life. So while the public keeps focusing on Kyle and Mauricio's romantic relationship, their children are creating an entirely new chapter. That's important. Because sometimes a family doesn't go back to what it was. It becomes something different. Kyle and Mauricio may not be living the same married life they had for 27 years. But they are still parents. Soon, they will also be grandparents. And their daughters are clearly old enough to have opinions about how both parents handle their new lives. That means Mauricio's dating choices aren't happening in a vacuum. Neither are Kyle's. Every new relationship can potentially affect the family dynamic. Every public photograph can create another awkward conversation. And every rumor can force the family to decide whether to laugh it off or address it. For now, humor seems to be one of their strongest tools. Portia can call her father a hoe. Kyle can laugh about having to warn him. Sophia can question him about photographs. And Mauricio can survive the embarrassment. But underneath all of that is something much more serious. The daughters are watching their parents become completely different versions of themselves. And they are learning how to love both versions. Kyle is no longer simply their dad's wife. Mauricio is no longer simply their mom's husband. They are now two independent people who happen to remain the parents of the same family. And that transition is still happening. So the real question isn't whether Mauricio can handle being roasted by his daughters. It's whether he can handle the much bigger challenge. Building a new life without damaging the family bond that he and Kyle spent nearly 3 decades creating. And judging by the way the family continues to show up for major milestones, they may actually be doing better than the headlines suggest. The "ho" comment is funny, but the real story behind it is much more complicated. Because Kyle Richards' daughters aren't simply reacting to Mauricio's dating life. They are reacting to the end of the family structure they grew up with. Kyle and Mauricio separated in 2023 after 27 years of marriage, but they have continued to co-parent their 3 daughters, Alexia, Sophia, and Portia. And that distinction matters. The marriage changed. The family didn't disappear. In fact, their recent behavior proves that. Just days ago, Kyle and Mauricio reunited to help Portia move into college. They traveled together, helped her settle into her dorm, and remained focused on making an important milestone about their daughter rather than their own relationship. So when Portia jokingly called Mauricio a hoe, it doesn't necessarily mean she hates her father or wants to control his life. It sounds much more like a daughter saying, "Dad, we see you." And that's probably exactly what Mauricio has had to learn since becoming single. His daughters are adults or approaching adulthood. They aren't little children who simply accept whatever their parents tell them. They have opinions. They have relationships of their own. And they can see the headlines just as easily as everyone else. When photographs of Mauricio with women appear online, those images don't just reach entertainment websites. They reach his daughters' phones. Their friends see them. Their social circles see them. And suddenly a private family situation becomes something they have to deal with publicly. That's a strange position for any child. And it's even stranger when both parents are famous. But Kyle's role in all of this is fascinating too. For years, she was Mauricio's wife. Now she's his estranged wife. That subtle difference changes everything. Kyle no longer has the same responsibility to protect Mauricio's image as she might have felt during their marriage. And when her daughter makes a joke about him, Kyle can laugh along. She even admitted that she may have enjoyed being the person who had to tell Mauricio what Portia said. That doesn't necessarily mean Kyle is trying to humiliate him. It shows that their relationship has evolved. The dynamic is no longer husband and wife protecting the marriage. It's now two parents trying to raise their children while living separate lives. And that's a huge difference. There's another development that makes the family's new chapter even more emotional. Kyle's eldest daughter, Farah, is now expecting her first child, meaning Kyle is preparing to become a grandmother. Farah recently revealed that Zach Goldsmith is the father, and the family, including Kyle and Mauricio, celebrated the news together. Think about how much the family has changed. Kyle and Mauricio started their marriage decades ago. They raised daughters together. Then their marriage changed. Now their daughters are becoming adults. One is going to college. Another is starting her own family. And suddenly, Kyle and Mauricio are entering a completely different stage of life. That makes the dark truth less about Mauricio being a HOE, and more about something nobody can avoid. Time changes families. The daughters who once needed their parents to guide them are now old enough to judge their parents' decisions. The parents who once controlled the family narrative now have to accept that their children have their own voices. And Kyle and Mauricio have to learn how to remain connected without pretending their marriage is what it once was. That's not easy. Especially when every mistake can become entertainment. But there's one thing the recent family moments make clear. Despite the jokes, the separation, and all the public speculation, the family continues to show up for each other. Kyle and Mauricio were both there for Portia's college milestone. They were both present for Farah's pregnancy celebration. And the family continues moving forward together even though the marriage at its center has changed. So maybe Portia's joke actually tells us something positive. She feels comfortable enough to tease her dad. Kyle feels comfortable enough to laugh about it. Mauricio is secure enough to take the criticism from his daughters. And underneath the jokes, there still appears to be a family bond. But that doesn't mean everything is simple. The biggest challenge may come when Mauricio eventually enters a serious relationship. Dating casually is one thing. Bringing someone new into a family that has already experienced a major breakup is completely different. Will the daughters accept her? Will Kyle feel comfortable? Will Mauricio's new partner understand that Kyle will always be part of his family because they share children? Those questions don't have easy answers. And the same applies to Kyle. If she eventually enters a serious relationship, Mauricio will have to navigate that reality too. Their separation means both of them are free to build new lives. But their daughters mean they can never completely leave each other's lives. That's the complicated truth behind everything. The marriage may have ended. The family relationship didn't. And perhaps that's why the HOE comment became such a viral moment. It was funny because it was brutally honest. But it was also revealing. Their daughters are no longer watching their parents from the sidelines. They are part of this new family chapter. And they are not afraid to speak their minds. Which leaves one huge question. When Kyle and Mauricio finally move seriously into their next relationships, will their daughters continue laughing about it? Or will the family dynamic become much harder to navigate? The biggest mistake would be to look at the HOE comment and assume the family is simply attacking Mauricio. The reality appears much more complicated. Kyle and Mauricio have been separated since 2023, but their daughters continue to keep both parents deeply connected. Kyle has previously explained that co-parenting with Mauricio is relatively easy because there isn't constant fighting between them, and their children can move between both parents without a rigid schedule. That matters because it explains why the daughters can tease their father while still maintaining a close relationship with him. They aren't necessarily taking Kyle's side. They are navigating their own relationship with Mauricio. And the family's recent milestones show just how much everyone's lives have changed. Portia graduated from high school with honors this year, and then prepared to leave home for college. Kyle described the moment as incredibly emotional, while Mauricio also publicly celebrated his youngest daughter's achievement. Then came the college move. Kyle and Mauricio reunited to help Portia move into the University of Colorado Boulder, showing that despite their separation, they can still come together for their children. That is a huge contrast to the image created by sensational headlines. One minute, we are hearing about daughters calling their father a hoe. The next, we are watching the same family travel together for one of the biggest moments in Portia's life. Both things can be true. They can joke about Mauricio. They can criticize him. They can be embarrassed by his dating life. And they can still love him deeply. That's actually what makes the family dynamic believable. Families aren't always serious. Sometimes people deal with uncomfortable situations through humor. And when the family has already lived through a very public separation, joking may be one way to make an awkward reality easier to handle. But there is another major change coming. Kyle's oldest daughter, Farah, is expecting her first child, meaning Kyle is about to become a grandmother, and Mauricio is entering another major stage of fatherhood. So think about where this family is now. Kyle and Mauricio are no longer living as husband and wife. Portia has left for college. Alexia is an adult with her own career and life. Sophia has also entered adulthood. And Farah is preparing to become a mother herself. The family Kyle and Mauricio created is growing up. And that means the old rules no longer apply. For decades, Kyle and Mauricio were the center of the family. Now their daughters are creating lives of their own. And Mauricio's dating life is simply one part of that transition. But there is still one issue that could create tension. New partners. Because it's one thing for the daughters to joke about their dad dating. It's another thing entirely if Mauricio eventually becomes serious with someone. At that point, the family has to deal with a completely different reality. A casual date doesn't become part of the family. A serious partner potentially does. And the same is true for Kyle. If either parent moves into a long-term relationship, their daughters will eventually have to decide how that person fits into their lives. That's where the jokes could become much more complicated. But for now, the family seems focused on something more important. Their children. Kyle and Mauricio may have failed to preserve their marriage, but they appear determined not to let that destroy their family connection. And perhaps that is the real, dark truth behind the headline. It's not that Mauricio is secretly some terrible father. It's not that his daughters have completely turned against him. It's that the family they knew for almost 3 decades no longer exists in exactly the same form. Everyone is growing. Everyone is changing. And everyone is learning how to maintain relationships after Kyle and Mauricio's marriage stopped being the foundation holding everything together. The HOE joke simply gave the public a funny glimpse into that adjustment. And honestly, the fact that Mauricio can apparently laugh, survive the teasing, and continue showing up for his daughters may say more about their relationship than any dramatic headline ever could. Because underneath the jokes, they are still his daughters. And he's still their dad. The marriage changed. The family didn't disappear. So what do you think about Kyle Richards' daughters calling Mauricio a HOE? Was it simply a hilarious family joke? Or do you think their comments reveal how uncomfortable they really are with Mauricio's new single life? And after nearly 27 years of marriage, do you think Kyle and Mauricio have truly found a healthy way to move forward as co-parents? Because one thing is clear, their marriage may have changed, but their family is still connected. Now I want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing down, drop your opinion in the comments. Do you think Mauricio deserves the teasing? Do you think Kyle secretly enjoyed watching him get called out? And most importantly, do you think Kyle and Mauricio can successfully navigate their separate lives without putting their daughters in the middle? If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next shocking celebrity story. Because around here, we don't just follow the headlines. We uncover the drama behind them. And remember, sometimes the funniest family joke reveals the most uncomfortable truth.